friendship, it poses a challenge in the eyes of the person who is hearing this information for the first time. It seems that the other person has changed, whereas the person who is revealing that information doesn't feel that they've changed. They're simply revealing more information. And so there's a weird tension dynamic that results from that. Yeah. My caveat here is that not all gay men, straight men friendships have that as a hurdle. I'm just saying that a hurdle was mentioned only in that kind of friendship here. Yeah. Yeah.
Was there something that you maybe thought that you might find that you didn't? And then what was the biggest surprise?
First question's very difficult. Maybe because I was trying to be a good sociologist. Preconceptions of what I was going to find.
So, given what, other people would study friendships or networks, and, we just read Cantor's work and work on, tokens and skewed distributions and all. So there's some stuff. So, so without, looking to find something, was there maybe something you thought might be going on that didn't turn up?
Well, I thought it would be easy as a gay man to find other gay men who have straight friends. And it turned out that was the most difficult category to find. People that, and that surprised me because, I'm working my own social network here. Beating the trees, hoping for fruit to run out, so unintended, right? to get somebody who would have a straight friend that would be willing to participate in this process. So that surprised me. I was also very much surprised by how difficult it was to find cross-class friendships. I've mentioned this to Lars and research method students every time I visit Lars's classes. I was impressed, and I came to a greater sense of appreciation for how class segregated we are as a society. But I think the biggest surprise in the research was how often race-based, gender-based, orientation-based humor is used as a way of bridging the gap between friends, diverse friends.
Could you repeat that?
The use of humor, how often humor came up as race-based humor, or gender-based humor, or orientation, religious humor, as a way of connecting with the friend of yours who's different from you in that same way. And then I realized there's actually some very sophisticated rules that people follow when engaging in this kind of humor. So for some people, it was just off limits. No race humor, we're not going to go there. But actually in the majority of friendships, and they brought it up themselves, and I eventually, it made its way into my head, and I started intentionally asking people eventually. If they didn't bring it up themselves, then I started asking them about that, because I wanted to hear from those who don't use humor as well. But among those who do, they establish some rules for doing it. Like they can only make fun of themselves or their own group, or they can only make fun of each other and each other's group and nothing else, or they can only make fun of other people and not themselves, right? But there's a testing the boundaries thing that goes with that, because it's not always successful. I heard stories of people who were saying, my friend did cross the line a few times, and then we had to have a discussion about that, right? So it's not like there's a rule book, it's trial and error and testing the comfort zone of each other. But for many people, the use of humor became central to their ongoing discussion of the difference between them. And so I kind of connected that to Goffman's notion of stigmatization and how humor is used to deflect the stigma away, to make people feel more comfortable with something that might otherwise be very awkward to talk about. Yeah, good question. Jackie? difference between you and your friend in such a way that you also honor it and you don't allow it to impede the relationship. Which means that you don't pretend it's not there for the most part. I mean, yeah, there were a number of people, like I mentioned before, who never actually had that conversation about each other. They might have talked about race relations in the United States, for example, but they haven't had a race conversation about, that's personal, about themselves. So that's where that delicate balance comes in. You don't want to erase that difference in the other person because it's probably an important part of who they are, right? But you also don't want to make it into something more than it has to be for the friendship itself. So that's where that delicate balance is. So what's funny is when I talked about this, and I had people react saying, oh, well, you know, gender doesn't really make any difference, and yet we just spent 2 hours talking about how gender made a difference. And so, but that only comes from stepping back and looking at the interviews afterwards, that you begin to realize that. In the course of the conversation, it makes sense for the people who are telling their stories. Yeah. I don't know, does that adequately answer your question? All right. I saw, yeah. Hi.
I kind of have a 2-part question.
Okay.
Earlier you were talking about how some friendships can be like in a forced situation, and some can be more organic, and sometimes the more organic situation tends to pan out better. But I'm wondering what the mix of your set of group sample was, and then if in one group or another, if it tended to be like a precipitating event that really got them together, like something significant, or if it was just more gradual, no matter.
Yeah. For the vast majority, it was a gradual thing. Some of them were thrown together because of circumstances, like at work, having to work together on a project, or the roommate or the carpool kind of situation. But for the vast majority, it was very gradual. I mentioned before that very few people meet their friends through their social network. I'm trying to remember the percentage. I think it was only 7% of those that I studied met their friend through their own social network. The rest, 93, whatever percent, met in one of those integrated kind of institutional settings that brought them together in the first place. Yeah. Okay, was that one part or?
No, that was both of them.
Okay.
I was going to wait for the answer on the first one, then I just said,
Yeah. But that?
We also talked about age, and I
Yeah.
was wondering if that's also institutionalized because people, like what you just mentioned, like if they had to work together, or was it organic as well? I'm just interested in how that came about.
The age ones. Racking my brain. I think age, religion, class, and ability. Those I had a much smaller sample for. I used them as comparison. Race,